Welcome to Shadow Crime Stories, the podcast that steps into the darkness and explores the cases that time will never forget. I'm your host, Roman.
And I'm Trish. We're thrilled to have you with us for our very first episode. Each episode, we'll be dissecting the details, the mysteries, and the human element behind some of history's most chilling crimes.
And for our debut, we're traveling back in time to the grimy, gaslit streets of Victorian London. We're delving into a case that has haunted criminologists and amateur sleuths for over a century, the Whitechapel Murders.
A series of crimes so brutal and so mysterious, they gave birth to a legend, a phantom who was given a name that still sends a shiver down the spine: Jack the Ripper.
So, Trish, to really understand this case, we have to paint a picture of the world where it happened. We're talking about Whitechapel, in London's East End in the autumn of 1888.
Absolutely. This wasn't the London of postcards. Whitechapel was a place of extreme poverty. It was overcrowded with thousands of people packed into squalid lodging houses. The streets were narrow, poorly lit, and often shrouded in a thick, smoggy fog.
You're so right. It was a sensory overload of the worst kind. The air was thick with coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and horse manure. You'd hear the constant noise of carts on cobblestones, the shouting of street vendors, and the desperate cries of people living on the edge. It was a place of shadows, both literal and metaphorical, the perfect environment for a predator. It was a place where people, especially the poor and destitute, could vanish without anyone taking much notice.
And for the women of Whitechapel, life was incredibly harsh. With few options for work, many were forced into street walking just to earn enough money for a bed for the night. They were vulnerable, living on the absolute fringes of society.
And it's into this desperate world that a killer emerges. On August 31st, 1888, the body of a woman named Mary Ann Nichols is discovered. She's the first of what would become known as the Canonical Five victims.
Right. Her murder was brutal, but at first it was treated as just another tragic event in a violent part of the city. No one knew it was just the beginning.
And it's so important to remember these women were more than just victims. Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly as she was known, was a mother of five. She'd fallen on hard times after her marriage ended, which is how she ended up in a Whitechapel workhouse, just trying to survive day by day. But then, just 8 days later, on September 8th, a second victim is found, Annie Chapman. The similarities are undeniable, and the violence has escalated.
Annie was known as Dark Annie to her friends. Like Polly, she had faced a series of misfortunes, including the death of a child and a struggle with alcoholism, which led to her separation from her husband. She was known for being industrious, often selling crochet work and flowers to get by. This is when the panic starts to set in. The press latches onto the story. Newspapers like The Star begin referring to the killer as the Whitechapel murderer and publishing sensationalist articles. People are starting to get scared.
And with that fear came a huge amount of public anger, aimed right at the police. People felt they weren't being protected. This led to a fascinating development. Local business owners, fed up with the police's failures, formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee.
Exactly. They were led by a local builder named George Lusk. They took matters into their own hands, pasting posters, offering a reward, and even hiring private detectives to patrol the streets at night. It shows you the level of desperation and the complete loss of faith in the official police force.
It had every reason to be, because what happened next showed this killer was unlike any other. The night of September 30th.
The double event. It's just incredible to think about. He kills one woman, Elizabeth Stride, but is likely interrupted by a witness. So what does he do? He simply finds another victim less than an hour later and a few streets away.
Catherine Eddowes, the audacity is staggering. It sends London into an absolute frenzy. This isn't just a random killer anymore. This is a phantom who seems to mock the police, killing with impunity right under their noses.
That's the part that always gets me. The sheer nerve of it. To be interrupted and then, instead of fleeing, to just carry on as if nothing had happened, it's beyond comprehension. And we should pause to remember them as people, too. Elizabeth Stride was a Swedish immigrant who ran a coffee shop with her husband before falling into poverty. Catherine Eddowes was a resilient woman, known for her cheerful disposition despite her hard life. She used to earn money by writing letters for her neighbors who couldn't write. Exactly. And around this time, something happens that cements his place in history. A letter, supposedly from the killer himself, is sent to the Central News Agency.
With London in the grip of fear, the pressure on the Metropolitan Police was immense. This was the biggest manhunt the city had ever seen, the infamous Dear Boss letter.
And it was led by some of the most famous detectives of the era. Chief among them was Inspector Frederick Aberline of Scotland Yard. A seasoned, methodical policeman, he was pulled from other duties to head the investigation on the ground in Whitechapel.
Aberline and his men faced a monumental task. They conducted hundreds of interviews, followed up on countless leads, and patrolled the dark streets of Whitechapel night after night. They were working with limited resources and primitive forensic methods, making their job incredibly difficult.
It taunts the police for being unable to catch him, and it's signed with a name, Jack the Ripper. To this day, we don't know if it was genuine or a journalistic hoax, but it didn't matter. The name stuck.
It gave a face to the faceless terror. Now the entire world knew his name.
And then came another letter, didn't it, Roman? This one was even more disturbing.
That's right, the From Hell letter, which was sent to George Lusk, the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It was sent in a small box, which contained half of a human kidney, preserved in wine. The letter claimed to be from the killer, who said he had fried and eaten the other half. It's a truly ghoulish detail that added another layer of horror to the case.
And just when the city thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. On November 9th, the killer commits his final, and by far his most gruesome act.
Mary Jane Kelly. Unlike the others, she was murdered indoors, in her own room. The killer had time and privacy. The scene that greeted the police was something out of a nightmare. We won't go into the graphic details, but it was a level of butchery that left even hardened officers speechless.
It was the horrifying climax to his reign of terror. And then...
silence. He just vanished. Gone.
Which brings us to the great, enduring mystery of the case, Roman. How does a killer this prolific, this brazen, just disappear into thin air?
It's the question that has fueled this mystery for 130 years. And a huge part of the answer lies in the limitations of the time. Think about it. There was no forensic science.
Right. No DNA, no fingerprinting database, no criminal profiling in the way we understand it today.
Exactly. The police were essentially working in the dark. They had to rely on eyewitness testimonies, which were notoriously unreliable and often contradictory. Some people described the man who looked shabby genteel. Others said he looked like a foreigner. The descriptions were all over the place.
And the environment itself was his accomplice. We talked about the fog and the dark labyrinthian streets. In an area with such a transient population, a stranger wouldn't necessarily stand out. He could commit a murder and be gone in seconds, swallowed by the city.
There are also theories about the killer's identity that could explain his escape. The idea that he was a man of some social standing, maybe a doctor or an aristocrat, someone the police would never seriously consider as a suspect.
That's a popular one. The surgical precision of the mutilations led many to believe he had medical knowledge. And that opens up a whole list of fascinating suspects, from royal physicians to local doctors.
But in the end, we simply don't know. He could have died of natural causes shortly after the last murder. He could have been committed to an asylum for an unrelated reason, or maybe he was imprisoned for a lesser crime.
Or he could have just stopped, realizing the police were closing in, or simply satisfying whatever dark impulse drove him.
And that's what makes the case so terrifying and so timeless. It's not the crimes themselves, as horrific as they were, but the utter void where the solution should be. He came from the shadows and returned to them, leaving nothing but a bloody legacy and a name.
And that's where the story of Jack the Ripper ends. Not with a resolution, but with a permanent, chilling question mark that hangs over history.
Thank you for joining us for our very first episode of Shadow Crime Stories.
We're so glad you could join us. We'll be back next time as we travel to 1930s America to investigate the tragic and truly bizarre case of the Cleveland torso murderer, another phantom killer who terrorized a city and then vanished.
Until then, stay safe and don't wander too far into the shadows.